Welcome back to the Tuxes Tomahawks podcast. I'm Adam DeRito, and today I have the pleasure of talking with Colonel Col Lee, a true American hero. We have a lot in common. We did our time in the Marine Corps, and now we decided to be a bunch of civil affairs people trying to save America and its allies and everything else. And he has a fascinating story about something that's not being really talked about right now, and that's the resettlement and saving people in Ukraine back here in the United States. So thank you so much, sir, for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, Adam, it's a real pleasure to be here. Enjoyed your opening video. Very interesting.
It's hilarious, right? Like, it's just, I'm like, hey, I need something that's just like shows all the deep state stuff in a one video with all the major players. And he came up with that. And I'm just like, that's good. Like, I never would have thought of that. I also don't know even how he did it, but it's hilarious. It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
So, sir, tell me how did your career start? When did you thought it was a good idea to join the Marine Corps? You and I have that in common a little bit. So I'm interested in your experience with all those things.
Sure, Adam. It actually started pretty early for me. My father was a Marine, but he was in the reserves. And, when I was a little kid, I don't remember anything about that. But about eighth grade, I decided I want to be a Marine. I just loved the history. There was just something about the Marine Corps that was really special. And so I was going to school in a pretty rural place, southwestern Pennsylvania, at the foothills of the Appalachians, all that good stuff. My dad realized that, it'd be hard for me to get into a place like the Naval Academy. I had kind of done my research and I understood the Naval Academy was one way to become a Marine officer. And the fact that it was free and it was supposedly a pretty good school, kind of intrigued me. So one day he sat me down and he said, look, there's a couple of different military schools that you can go to that could help you get into a place like the Academy. And he put down, like, what was it, Fork Union or Valley Forge, New Mexico Military Institute, I think was around back then. And then he threw down this brochure and it had a bunch of guys wearing Marine uniforms. And it was a place called Marine Military Academy in Harlingen, Texas. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, Dad, I want to go there. Right. And it was actually run by, Marines. And of course, these guys were like legends, young guy like me at that time. Most of them were 3 war vets, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, at least 2,
Wow.
all combat vets. And man, you want to talk about hard men. I just look back on that now and just having that as a way of kind of getting started. And then, of course, getting into the Naval Academy, I always intended to go Marine Corps. A lot of people don't realize that I think it's now up to over 20% of the graduates from the Naval Academy actually go Marine Corps. So we're part of one of the naval services. So anyway, that's what kind of got me in, Adam. And it's been a nice long journey since then.
No, that's awesome. So you, what year did you graduate the Naval Academy?
1987.
That's the year I was born. So that's kind of funny. See, and
Well,
it's funny because
feel better.
well, the funny thing is, like, so I'm an Air Force Academy guy, right? And I got accepted to West Point and Annapolis or Merchant Marine and Air Force. And I'm like, you know what? I want to get as far, because I'm from New York, grew up in New Jersey. And I'm like, you know what? I want to get as far away from the East Coast as possible. I want to go skiing every weekend. And I just want to fly jets. And then I went out to the Air Force Academy. I'm like, what the hell did I just do to myself? I'm like, this is a big mistake because I did not get along with anybody that I went to school with at the Air Force Academy. And the funny thing was, I ended up doing the cross commission program at USAFA, going to Brown Field, and then cross commissioning into the Marine Corps later on after that, because I'm like, I got to go back to my people. And then all my friends were making fun of me because that was 2006, 2007 time frame, and I was a 2010 guy. So, and all my friends are in the Korengal Valley in Afghanistan, blowing up bad guys. They're like, what are you doing trying to be an officer over there? You should have came with us. So I saw the light, went over there, had a fun little history with that, and then got out off active duty for a couple of years, and then I came back and joined the Army because I thought that was a good idea. And I went and enlisted. I was with 519 Special Forces Group for several years as a parachute rigger, jumping out of planes and doing all that stuff. And then I went overseas to CENTCOM, deployed as an intel guy, and then ended up meeting civil affairs out there. And then I ended up coming back, and then I just swapped back and direct commissioned back with the Army. So that's what I do now as a 38 Gulf with civil affairs. So tell me, like, what you've been doing in the civilian world until you got into the Army, and your experience with civil affairs, because that's something we definitely have in common with the Cross Tomahawks. So.
Yeah, so as we kind of talked about, I started out in artillery. Artillery is a great place to start your career as an officer because not only are you there and kind of on the front lines of the infantry maneuver forces, but you have to deal a lot with logistics, communication, all the things, shoot, move, and communicate.
Yep.
Uh, that really kind of get you going. And then, as we discussed before, I did about 7.5 years active duty. I got out mainly because of my family. And I went to work. My first job was actually a manufacturing supervisor at Rubbermaid at their main facility in Worcester, Ohio. And talk about a transition. You're going from leading young, hard charging Marines to being a Marine supervisor of like 45 folks on a shop floor, most of whom were like middle aged women.
Yeah.
Uh, and they could say things that would make me blush, as a Marine. Yeah, so I learned a lot. Kind of talk about baptism under fire.
Yep.
You went through that transition. Then I moved over to General Electric, GE Plastics division for several years, and then ended up here in Hartsville, South Carolina, with Sunoco Products Company. Really, just doing a variety of things. I mean, Adam, like you and I have talked about. I mean, we have very, very broad backgrounds.
Hmm.
So on the civilian side, I mean, I started out as a manufacturing supervisor, went into the Six Sigma process improvement program,
Yep.
was involved in sales and marketing, business development, supply chain. And then I ended up my career, most of the last of my career was in information technology. So all kind of good things to know. So while I was doing that, I took a couple of years off where I was really kind of focused on, starting my civilian career. But I missed the Marine Corps so much when I moved down to work for GE around Charlotte.
Hmm.
Went to the local reserve station and just, said, I want affiliation for the Marine Corps. And actually, what caused me to really miss the Marine Corps? Have you ever read the book or seen the movie Flags of Our Fathers?
Yes. Great. Great book and great movie. So.
Yeah, so this was, I'd been out for about a year and a half or so. I read the book, and my wife will tell you I was like in the worst mood for like the 2 weeks after that because I missed the Marine Corps so much. So I went in there, knocked on the door, said, "Hey, you want me to sweep floors? I'll do whatever I do." And there was a great officer there who was the XO, Jerry Fisher, and Jerry said, we need a maintenance control officer, and with your background, especially in process improvement, organization, all that sort of stuff, we're going to bring you on. So ended up doing that, and they got me hooked. And being a
Hate it
reservist,
when that happens.
war and terror. Yeah, well, being a reservist in the global war on terror, you end up spending a lot of time downrange. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, I was in Iraq in 2006 during the Al Anbar awakening, if you're familiar with that.
Yep. Just
Um,
when I joined when I was 18. So.
well, and I tell you what an amazing time to be in Iraq because we came in when it was kind of at its worst.
Right.
But I got to work directly with General Allen, if you General
Oh
John
wow.
Allen.
Really? That's really
Yeah,
cool.
amazing man. And then the G5 underneath him was a guy named John Koenig, who I knew
Hmm.
who was a fellow artillery officer. But those two gentlemen, I mean, you want to talk about IQ because most of the time we think Marines are pretty dumb, but those guys were both absolutely brilliant, and we just did some amazing things there. And for me as a reservist to be part of that was absolutely amazing because we saw things just turn almost overnight. I mean, in a period of a few months, you went from a really, really bad place to a place that, had a chance. And then my second deployment, I was very fortunate as well. That one was during the Obama surge with the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Brigade,
Hmm.
the MEB Afghanistan. So working for another great general, Larry Nicholson.
Hmm.
And boy, I tell you, man, we we pushed it. We pushed it hard for a year. Really, really made a difference in southern Afghanistan. Of course, unfortunately, that neither one of those wars ended the way that you and I would like to.
Yeah.
But blessed with a great career.
No, and you make a lot of good points, and I'll actually have to agree with you. A lot of people think Marines eat crayons. But I will tell you that the Marines that I've worked with over the years, and even during my short period of time with them, they were the most intellectual, thought-provoking leaders, NCOs, and officers that I ever met. And I had the pleasure of meeting General Mattis, back in the day, and just listening to how he articulates his thoughts and how they do things. Because to be fair, I honestly think that most Marines take the Commandant's reading list, for Bible, you know what I mean? Like for gospel.
Yes.
And they actually go out and they read and they actually try to educate themselves on the art of war and how to improve their processes and things. And I can't say that about the Air Force. I can't say that about the Army, but I would say that Marines are generally hungry for knowledge and try to improve their processes, even though they might eat a box of Crayola 64 every now and then. That's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, Adam, you and I kind of have that similar background. Like for fighting the wars that we're fighting now, I mean, you really have to be constantly learning, constantly growing.
Absolutely.
And you have to have a lot of knowledge about a lot of different things because it's not just about pulling triggers, putting warheads on foreheads.
No, and I'll agree with this because, and I actually want to talk to you about this because civil affairs in the Marine Corps is something that nobody talks about, right? It's like an unknown branch in the Marine Corps. No one even knows it exists because when you say civil affairs, everyone thinks it's the Army, Special Operations Command, and everything else. But nobody talks about that. No, the Marines have their own civil affairs unit, and your background in processing and manufacturing is definitely a key thing. And we talked about this right before we came on here, but logistics is what wins the war. That's what makes our military the best in the world, is that we could put a Burger King in any country in 24 hours, so to speak, right? And not any other military in the world can do that. And civil affairs is a unique mission, right? It's, blowing people up and killing terrorists is cool, and playing with tanks and airplanes and bombs is great. But at the end of the day, and at least the background I'm familiar with the Army is that, I don't know if you're familiar with this story, but it's fascinating because I just got back from Normandy a couple weeks ago. I got to go out there and jump in D-Day, meet some of the surviving World War II vets, and I got to learn about the initial mission of civil affairs. And how it started was on Normandy. They had two guys that they direct commissioned out of the civilian world who was like a farmer and I think he was like a pathologist or animal husbandry or something, because they realized that, the D-Day invasion is going to be really important, but we're going to kill everything on this beach and beyond it for the next several miles, right? And like I said, the infantry guys are really good at pulling triggers, but all the people that we leave behind, all the civilians, like, well, you just cratered my entire farm. Like, now what? And like, well, sorry, we got to keep going killing the Nazis. So these two guys came in behind them with their small group of Army soldiers, and they were just like, all right, so this is how we're going to replant the ground, and we're going to burn all the bodies of the cattle that got killed so we don't poison your water sources, and we're going to get the agriculture back and running, and we're going to help rebuild houses and drill water wells that aren't contaminated and stuff. And people don't understand that civil affairs is actually probably one of the most important missions in the U.S. military, because we're really good at, killing people and going after things, but it's rebuilding and building those partnerships with these countries that is so critically important to maintaining our international dominance.
Yeah, Adam, absolutely. It is a true force multiplier,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're smart, you're using civil affairs, especially heavily in the front end, the phase 01 conflict
Yep.
prevention, and especially on the back end, because if you look at where America gets in the most trouble, is we get dragged into wars that we aren't necessarily, ready for. And we don't do a very good job on the back end. And again, if you look in Iraq and Afghanistan, those are, two pretty stark examples there. But you really need to have it all throughout. Like you said, everything from, post conflict, post clearing, going in, taking care of claims, trying to restart economy, trying to establish rule of law in
Yep.
countries that don't
It's
necessarily have
difficult.
a history of rule of law. It's tough stuff, and
Yeah.
you got to have smart people working it.
Yeah. And is the civil affairs in the Marine Corps, it's reserve component only, or do they have an active duty component as well?
I'm not as quite as up to date because I retired in 2016. At one point, we had active duty folks that were mostly doing kind of the planning,
Right.
and probably a couple of teams that were active duty just because you could, you didn't have to mobilize them, right? To
Yeah. It's
put
just
'em forward.
continuity of operations.
Right, but the majority were actually in the reserves and what we call civil affairs group. So I had the honor of actually standing up one of the newer ones in Chicago that is still
Mhm.
there. I think they disbanded a couple of the CAGs. We had four at one time. We started with two, added two, then took took back the two. Um, I think people were going to realize, because the other thing, let's talk about irregular warfare for a minute, right?
Yeah,
Um, we always we call it irregular, but it's not, right? I mean, if you look
right.
throughout history, irregular warfare takes place all the time, and it's
It's how we
actually
started it in the revolution. It was all regular
right.
warfare.
And when we're quote doing regular warfare or conventional warfare, there's a huge irregular component to what we're doing. I
Yeah.
mean, you think about the resistance in World War II, everything. So, I'm a big fan of regular warfare. One of my passions is to make sure that we don't forget about that, kind of like we did after Vietnam. It was kind of
Yep.
like, oh, we're never going to do that again, right? And then for
That's what we
guys
did.
like you and me, when you're in Iraq and Afghanistan,
That's
guess what
all
we
you
were
do.
doing? We were pulling out the old manuals from Vietnam and saying, look, this is how those guys did it back then.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's
so
funny. It's funny because that's what the Germans complained about in World War II is that they studied our tactics manuals and they learned everything they could about us, but they're like those damn Americans never follow their own rules, they couldn't predict what we were going to do, right? And
yeah,
and and yeah, so basically, kind of from what you told me is that the civil affairs component in the Marine Corps is set up exactly the way the Army is. So we have one active duty component, 95th, out of Fort Bragg, but then the rest, over 80% of civil affairs in the U.S. Army is reserve components because they are supposed to be civilian experts, whether it's law enforcement, veterinarians, doctors,
correct.
lawyers, myself, like I'm an oil and gas wastewater treatment guy. So that's my specialty, right? Is water purification and energy supply. Because let's be honest, regular infantry Marines and infantry guys in the Army, they have no idea what the hell any of that is. They just go, do I break that or not? Right?
Yeah,
Like, what does this valve do? What is this? I don't know how to ride a horse. Or,
yeah,
because like when you go overseas, like a lot of these, third world countries and stuff, they depend a lot on, animals, like goats and horses and camels and everything else. And, an Army guy looks at that and just wants to take a picture with it, but they don't know if it has a disease. They don't know how the trade works between, the different tribes and everything else. But that's how you can convince civilian experts to join the Army is like you give them a little bit more of an incentive. They can keep their civilian job, making those higher wages, but then they can come in and assist those components and actually using us as a force multiplier for good versus acting all confused and just throwing around bags of cash like they did in Afghanistan, because that worked out real well. I think one of my favorite stories, did you ever read the Afghanistan papers by any chance?
I probably did, but it's probably years ago.
Yeah, it's a fascinating book because it pretty much admits how much we screwed that up, right? And they were telling this one story about how like this captain and his infantry unit would keep going to these villages, and they were like, all right, so we're gonna build this bridge and we're gonna bring in all this John Deere Cat tractor equipment, we're gonna build this infrastructure and this road for you, and here's like whatever, here's like $500,000 to do it. Well, they'd give the village the money, and then his brother was like a Taliban dude. So then he'd tell the Taliban guys when they were done building the bridge, and then the
Yeah,
Taliban guy would come in and blow the bridge up. He goes, "Hey, we need another $500,000 and new tractors because they blew everything up." And like the army would be like, oh, "Okay, we'll just go grab another duffel bag full of cash and give it to you." So like obviously, like you see when the active duty guys try to get involved in civil affairs operations, they have absolutely no idea what they're doing because they keep throwing money at the problem because their only job is to put rounds down range for the most part, right? So I completely agree is that, our experiences in bringing in civilian expertise in order to use us as a force multiplier is absolutely critical to the mission, and it's something that not a lot of foreign countries do very well.
yeah, and I will say that I think the Marine Corps did a pretty good job. The maneuver commanders, they came to learn the importance of civil affairs. They took very seriously the concept that they were the battle space owner.
Yeah.
So in some ways, they were the governors, the mayors, whatever. So they may not have been experts, but I think they started to realize how important everything that we were doing was. And I was very fortunate that the two times that I mentioned I went forward, we had commanders that really understood that and made that a priority for us. But yeah, very much, and it kind of leads into the civil affairs background. How I ended up in trying to help out Ukrainians when
Right.
we get to that part of the story. But yeah, it's all part of the background.
Yeah, because everybody always jokes that we're just the guys that walk around villages and hand out soccer balls. Like that's always the joke with civil
Yeah,
affairs. Like all you guys do is hand out soccer balls. It's like, hey, you know what? We do a lot more than that. We're all trained in the art of war, so to speak. But our biggest component is to pick up the pieces and put things back together and make people trust us once you guys, move on to the next village or clear the next area, whatever it is. But you're right. It's something Americans have been doing ever since the inception of our country. Is unconventional warfare, and it's something that hopefully we had to learn a lot of hard lessons in Vietnam, and we had to learn a lot of hard lessons, in Afghanistan. And I'm hoping that, the next generation of leaders that you inspired before you got out in 2016, and under the guys that I work with now, is that they're going to try to learn from our mistakes, and that we can actually keep improving those processes and keep insinuating that American forces are a force for good and not just the police force of the world, so to speak.
Yeah, and I did want to also recognize you mentioned 95th Civil Affairs Brigade. I don't know if it's the brigade. I think they downsized it back to battalion, but
Yeah, that's a
um,
battalion now.
we worked with them really closely when I was standing up the Third Civil Affairs Group in Chicago, and they were tremendous in helping us. In fact, we even fielded a team, our own civil affairs team, that went through the soft qualification course for soft CA.
Yep, so now can't
And
recall.
right. So, yeah, Colonel J.B. Brown was the original one that I worked with, and then Colonel Scott Story replaced him. Both outstanding officers, and talk about reaching across the aisle, to the Marines and helping the Marines out. So I have a lot of respect for the soft CA guys with 95th and the Army Reserve CA guys that we worked with as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's something that is very underlooked and people don't really pay attention to. But so you got out in 2016, and what did you start doing from there? Because I want to definitely lead into what we're actually here to talk about today, because I think it's something that's definitely been missing from the headlines recently. So
Right. So, yeah, 2016 was when I left the reserves.
hmm
I had this kind of corporate career, raising kids, all that sort of thing. When I came back from Afghanistan, which would have been 2010, um, I really felt like it was that time in life where I needed to get more involved in the community.
right,
So I tried to take some of the things that I learned and got involved locally. Worked on a particular neighborhood in the downtown area. Got what they call a community block development grant. I know you're pretty involved in local community stuff, so you probably understand this. But you learn how to make things work in your community. And I had this conversation on another podcast, but everybody wants to change things, right? Everybody has a passion about something.
yeah.
But too many people today, I mean, their idea changes, going out on a Saturday, and holding up signs and yelling at policemen or whatever, right?
Yeah,
And to me, it's like that's not how you do change,
no.
buddy. You know,
No.
um,
Or they go
and,
take those opportunistic pictures, right? Like, when disaster
yeah,
strikes, they go take a selfie. Like, oh no, there's a certain Green Beret in our community. His name is Tim Kennedy, and he likes to go around and find every disaster, take a picture of himself, and lie about what he's doing, like having 50 grenades in a backpack and running around Afghanistan, which never happened apparently. You know what
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
But
yeah.
but you're right. Is that especially from the world we come in, it's very much an association of quiet professionals, right? We don't ask for recognition of what we do.
Right. Yeah, and you're working behind the scenes, you're working by, with, and through.
By with and through.
Exactly. You're talking to the city officials first, trying to understand about the neighborhood. What's the infrastructure that's there? Does it make sense to do investment? How do we get money? To do it? How do we make sure the community's bought in and understands the importance of it? All those things that we just kind of do as civil affairs folks, we don't even think about it, right?
Because
But
that's like
that's what we
normal
do,
life for us. That's like normal
right?
life for us, right? And you make a great point, because this is something I emphasize with my Bravos. Like, our Bravos are our enlisted operators, right?
Hmm.
And it's like, yeah, you guys are really good and doing. They always claim that they're really good at the reconnaissance stuff, but if you don't know what you're reconning, it
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense, right? So people like you and me who've been in the civilian professional world, and we have to build those business relationships. It's about talking to the politicians, the mayor of the town, the
Yep.
the water guy, right? The guy who's in charge of the DPW, so to speak, or the power lines and everything else. Like, you may think you understand things because you're an American, but I promise you, go to India, go to Nepal, and see how they run their electrical systems.
Yeah.
Because you're like, I don't think you could plug any more extension cords into that pole before we light this building on fire, but here we are, right? And you have to learn to also adapt. And I think you'll agree with this: is that you can't Americanize everything overseas. It doesn't work
No.
at all. You have to learn, what do you guys do? What's your normal process? And how can we slightly improve it to make you want to work with us, so we can continue building those relationships? And I think that's something that the conventional military doesn't understand very well, but it's something that especially civilian professionals in civil affairs understand way better than most.
Yeah, and I used to tell my reserve Marines, I'm like, look, you can actually practice your job, your wartime mission in your daily life.
Yep.
I mean, you
Yep.
live in a hometown, like you said, get involved. Figure out who the mayor is, figure out, where the power centers are, figure out, how to affect change, gather information, build relationships. And then of course you've got an intel background too. And as you know, I mean, there's a lot of synergies between civil affairs and the intel community.
It's one and the same almost.
Yeah, well, we got to be careful. There's a firewall there.
Yeah, I know. I don't
But,
want to piss off all the
yeah.
35 series guys. Like, shut up. No, we're not. We're better than you. You know what I mean?
Well, and also I don't want people that are working with us to think that we're doing it just because we're trying to gather intel. Because I
Exactly.
tell
Right.
people
Right.
we deal with relationships and information and projects and programs, right? That's what we do on the civil affairs side. But when you're doing that, you gain an incredible insight for how things work. I mean, the systems of systems that we always talk about in the
Right.
military and everything, the indirect approach that special forces talks about. I mean, that
Yep.
all gets blended into that.
No, you're right, and it's yeah, because normally in intel we're looking for the threats, the higher end things to that. But like
Correct.
when you're civil affairs, you're looking for all the components that make that civilian population work. Because I always tell that the three easiest ways to cause a civil war is take away your food, your power, and your water. Right, and
Yeah.
civil affairs, our job, if we could stabilize food, power, and water, we can keep the IEDs off the roads. We can keep because people have a place to go home to. They have clean water. They have somewhere to plug their cell phone into. And if they
And
have something to eat, they will, for the most part, leave everyone the fuck alone. But if they don't have that, if they're missing one of those things from the tripod, be prepared to deal with insurgency, right? And that's where the intel aspect comes in. Is like who's a threat, who's going to drop a Molotov cocktail into the power station, right? And those things, right? So you're correct. The civil affairs' job is not to collect counterintelligence, so to speak, against threats, but civil affairs can provide a lot of insight to where those things might be located. Like, I don't know, walking around the Pacific Islands and there's a building with a bunch of wires sticking out and a bunch of Chinese lettering on the window. Huh, that seems weird. I wonder what's going on in there, right? And then we tell the intel guys that, and then they do their human stuff after that. But civil affairs have so much more access because you're right. We normally walk around in civilian clothes. We try to integrate with the population for the most part, and just try to be like we're normal business leaders. Like they look me up on LinkedIn when I'm overseas, and they're like, "Oh, he actually does work in oil and gas and water treatment. Like he doesn't have like this blacked out military profile, right, so to speak."
right.
But we could provide a lot more insight to the intel things to keep our guys safe and the population safe as well, because we can tell higher headquarters where to redirect those assets if needed. So.
Absolutely.
So tell me how you got involved, after your career, in the military, and then what you started getting involved with in the Ukraine. Because like we said beforehand, I was overseas when the Ukraine war kicked off. We were one of the first intelligence assets, supporting
Sure.
EURCOM from CENTCOM, and it is a lot. There's a lot more going on than people are aware of, and you've been directly involved in that. And I think that's a fascinating story that people need to hear.
Yeah, so it really actually started with the precipitous withdrawal in Afghanistan for me.
Hmm.
I was out at that time, but a good friend of mine who actually served with me in Afghanistan as a State Department stabilization advisor, John Gerlaw, we had always kind of kept in touch. And John started this charity called Team Afghan Power. And I had just left the corporate world in 2019, and John reached out to me and said, hey, I'm I'm planning on making a trip to the Panjshir Valley in 2019. So I don't know if you kind of remember the history, but we didn't even have coalition forces in the Panjshir Valley in
Yeah.
2019. But we went there. We were invited there by the provincial governor, and John's group, Team Afghan Power. What they're trying to do is to use sustainable energy as a means of stabilization for these remote villages that were
Hmm.
kind of being pressured by the Taliban. And of course, the Panjshir Valley at that time was a no-go area
Yep.
for the Taliban. So we did that for a couple of weeks. Then, of course, the precipitous draw happens like a year later. And, John says, okay, what can we do to help get some of our people out, people that
Hmm.
we knew that worked with us, but any other Afghans. So he was able to change over Team Afghan Power into kind of a humanitarian rescue and humanitarian supplies type organization. Unfortunately, if you know anything about trying to change the mission of a 501c3, it's bureaucratic and it takes a little bit of
Yeah.
time, right?
Yeah. A little
Um,
bit.
Yeah, so by the time we really got into that, and I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to share everything, but we got pretty far down the road. But there were a couple of things that you ran into after that kind of initial rush of all the Afghans that got out there. I mean, all the major bases, Doha and everything over there, they got overrun, right?
Yeah.
And in some cases, people were flying in planes and not even telling them, right? It's like, hey, here's a
Yep.
plane load of Afghans. Go figure it out. We were trying to be more deliberate, so we had to find like, okay, where's the lily pad? Where are you going to put these people temporarily? And then the bigger thing was like, what's the end game for them? It's like that's great, like we were talking about before. You can get an adrenaline rush out of going and pulling people out of a combat zone. But these are Afghans. So what's the long-term plan for them? You got to have a place for them
Yep.
to live. You got to have a country that will actually take them. And then the last piece of it, and this is where Carolinas for Ukraine comes into play, that we talked about a lot, was how do you properly resettle folks? All right. It's one thing to drop someone
Something
in a
nobody
foreign
thinks about.
country. Right, but that is the long pole in the tent. And so I remember as we were thinking through this whole problem set, that was something that was always kind of out there. We didn't have the perfect solution for it, but we knew that was going to be a big issue. So that's kind of the precursor here. So fast forward, you've got the Russians invading Ukraine in 2022, early 2022. I'm sitting here in my little town, Hartsville, South Carolina, and an elderly couple just kind of showed up in Hartsville. I heard about it, and they're Ukrainian. Well, it turns out that we have a lady that lives here that had been living in the U.S. for 17 years, married to an American, and those were her parents. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. And of course, our church, we got together, we held a concert, raised some funds for them, all that sort of thing. Then about a month later, I started hearing rumors about another family coming over, this time a younger family with a child. And I'm kind of scratching my head a little bit. I'm like, how is this happening? And I heard about this program called Uniting for Ukraine, which was a program that was actually created under the Biden administration. But if you remember, immediately after the invasion, I mean, you had, I think the statistics I looked at was like 1.1 million refugees left Ukraine within a period of like 2 to 3 weeks
Yeah.
of the
It
war.
was insane.
Yeah, and now they're sitting at, I think, depending on who you talk to, around 6.9 million refugees. So these are people that are actually outside of the border of Ukraine. This doesn't even count the ones that are internally displaced, like all the ones in the Donbass
Yep.
region that have had to move over, right? So huge movement of people, right? Huge movement of people, huge displacement. And if you remember with the Afghans, the ones that we brought over, we put them on the military bases and we kept them there for weeks. And we went through all the
Oh yeah.
screening and training, and then we figured out where they're going to resettle, and we helped them resettle. So there was kind of like a real program and process. Well, what was different about United for Ukraine was basically you had to have a U.S. sponsor, so somebody from the United States had to basically apply, say that we're going to sponsor these Ukrainians coming over. They would do a background check on you, make sure you had enough financial means to support them and everything. And then they would they would do the same thing to the Ukrainians. They do a background and check on them, and if everything was good, they gave them something called a travel authorization, which meant that you had a ticket, not literally a ticket, but you had the approval to come into the U.S. and resettle. But there was no program once you arrived.
Yeah.
So what was happening was this a great lady. She found out about the program, did the research, connected with this family. So they were both like some of the first people to come over. Bought her a ticket, and she and her family came over, and literally they picked them up at the airport and brought them back to Hartsville, and that was the extent of the resettlement early on, right? So I'm sitting there thinking this through and saying, like, this is great, but if people don't really understand all that it takes to properly resettle someone, uh, that could be not a good thing, right? There's a
Yeah.
lot of things that could go wrong. So I pulled in, all the people that I know in the community that, might be involved in this sort of thing. I mean, the healthcare side of it, because, of course, a lot of them, come over and they need not
Yep.
just healthcare, but sometimes they need corrective, health things that have been pushed off. The financial support, all the sort of things, the churches, everybody in the community that I thought would be important. And we kind of said, hey, do we need an organization, or should we form an organization to help these folks that are coming from war torn, places? And the resounding answer was absolutely yes. So we went ahead and formed Carolinas for Ukraine. Now, we were lucky enough, we had an existing community foundation that I was part of. In fact, I was the founding chair of. So we were able to use that, as our umbrella organization. Again, this is that kind of boring bureaucratic stuff that people don't like to hear about, but that's the thing that actually gives you the ability to make things happen.
Yes.
Because if you're trying to get a 501c3 status, it could take you easily 6 months to a year
Yeah.
to get that status, right? So that's how we operate, is under the community foundation, but we have our own advisory board, and pretty much volunteers. A couple of the Ukrainians actually I've kind of hired, where we just pay them, so kind of paid volunteers is kind of a way to help out. And we've been around since June 2022.
No, that's amazing. And like I was also involved in the withdrawal of Afghanistan. We got 36 people out, but it wasn't an official organization. It was a bunch of dudes that we went to USAFA together,
Yeah,
and a bunch of special operators that I paid in Johnny Walker Blue. I spent a lot of money on Johnny Walker Blue, saying like,
yeah,
"Hey, I don't give a fuck. Get them on the aircraft. Scan this code. Here's their target package. We're gonna evac them out and get them out." But we were able to through our own means resettle an entire family. In Houston, Texas, and we did save them, and they were some of the last people to get over the wall before Abbey Gate blew. But like you said, it was just a bunch of regular Americans just trying to figure this out because our government was failing so catastrophically to do the right thing. And what a lot of people don't want to talk about was, Americans love the good feel story of, yeah, we got him out, mission accomplished. No, it's everything that comes after that. I remember we had several people that were stuck on the runway in Qatar for
yes,
months before we can get them flown out. And nobody wants to talk about this, though. It's a really ugly fact of this. A lot of Afghans died in Qatar because they were stuck in these tents with no air conditioning, no medical supplies, no nothing. And we let them bake and die in the sun in Qatar. And like, it was like, well, we got you out. We just don't have a plan after this, right? Because it was the visas and the special immigrant visas and trying to get them processed to get them out of the country. And nobody, like, everyone just forgets about that. Like, it didn't happen. But there was so much going along with that. And I'm sure you've seen the same exact process where it's like, all right, we got you out. All right, now figure it out. It's all up to you guys, right? And if it's not for Americans
yeah,
like you actually going through that process of like what it takes to resettle, because these are human beings, right? They're not
right,
they're not just like people that we just forget about because their 30 seconds of fame is over on the news. Like, they have families to take care of. And like you said, they need corrective medical things. They need to find a job because, like, if we don't get these people established, they might become more of a problem because, like I said, when people get desperate for things, like, they'll figure out a way by with and through of how to figure it out, right? And we don't want that here. We want to make sure that people have jobs, that they're safe, that they're healthy, and that they want to raise families and they want to Americanize themselves, so to speak, right? Because that's what our country's all about, is coming over to this country and abiding by our values and everything else. But if it's not for organizations like yours, it's not going to happen because the U.S. government obviously is not contributing to this mission at all. Other than, we got him out, figure it out.
yeah.
It's not how it works though. Like this, it's like, oh,
Well,
thanks, Biden. Appreciate that. Yeah, we'll just throw him out on the street. I got him out. We just don't know what to do with him after that. It's like taking a fish out of a fish tank and throwing him on the street and say, well, there's a sewer if you find it.
yeah, Adam, we could probably have a whole podcast just on our shared experience in Afghanistan. Um, yeah, it was pretty amazing. I mean, talk about a pickup basketball team, and as you probably know, some of the best and worst Americans were the ones that showed up, right? I mean,
Yeah,
there's some who were total charlatans, or some that had big hearts but had no business to even be involved in this kind of stuff. And then
no,
there were some like incredibly capable people, and it's a capability that I think we'll use in the future. It's been used all the time now, because now we figured out how to organize and how to do stuff like that. In fact, that fellow I was telling you about, John Gerlaw, has an organization that he's working with, Friends of Liberty and Justice, that's doing a lot of the non-lethal supplies for
Yeah.
folks fighting in Ukraine right now. Pretty amazing organization. But so kind of getting back to the Ukraine thing, you're absolutely right. And this is kind of a broader conversation for America about immigration. So let me first state, and I'm a conservative Republican kind of guy, right? But I firmly believe that our country needs immigration. We
Hmm.
don't have a growth rate that would be sustainable without immigration, and we should want immigration. And I do think that there's a way that we can do immigration that makes sense if we could ever kind of get the political partisan side out of the way
Right.
and just said, like, what do we need in America? And there's a lot of people who would love to come to America. And oh, by the way, like the Ukrainians that we've brought here to Hartsville, they are smart, they're hardworking. They want to become Americans or at least be part of the community. They have become part of the community. They may need a little bit of help to kind of get up and going, maybe something from 3 to 6 months. But once you do that, they're producing more than most of our U.S. citizens are. They're paying taxes, they're obeying the laws, their kids are going to school, playing sports. They're actually volunteering for charitable organizations in Hartsville as refugees
Yeah.
themselves. So, this is a pretty easy group. Um, if you just, if you welcome them, if you open your arms, you bring them in. And the other thing that's so amazing is how grateful they are, because several of them when they first came, at first they it's almost like they didn't trust us. It's like,
Yeah.
you guys are helping us, like, what,
Right.
why are you helping us? I mean, you don't even know who we are. We're not even from the same country. And
Right.
that's what makes America great, right? I mean,
I agree.
that's the stuff that makes a difference overseas. I tell folks, like we said, you can do civil affairs at home, but get involved in missions overseas. Do
Yep.
stuff like that too. That's what really sells America.
No, I completely agree with you. And so, like you said, I think America, especially the news headlines, because every American has the attention span of a squirrel, which is, I think, is about 7.4 seconds. And,
Right.
and they want to concentrate on the bad. They want to concentrate on MS-13 or Tren de Aragua. And yeah, those are bad dudes. Like, I've had to deal with them out here in Colorado, right? They are killing Americans. They are not
Sure.
abiding by the things that we talk about. But, like, that is not the majority of immigrants that are actually trying to do the right thing. They actually want to come here through the legal processes. They want to do all the right things. They want to pay taxes. They want to send their kids to school. They want to participate in the community. And I think you're seeing that a lot with the Ukrainian immigration effort, even the South African immigration effort right now. And it's
Hmm.
something that's just not recognized. They don't get a lot of credit for that because Americans are just so glued to the bad. They don't want to talk about the good, right? And I 100% agree with you. I've worked with a lot of Eastern Europeans, and they are way harder working than Americans. Sorry, America, you are fucking lazy. I can't get you guys to show up to work on time. But
Yeah.
I work in the oil and gas industry, right? And
Yeah.
80% of the guys I work with, they're all Hispanics, but they're illegal Hispanics, and man, do they hate the illegals a lot. It's actually really funny watching them go after it. You
Sure.
watch the legal Mexicans go after the illegal Mexicans at the local gas station trying to get burritos going down to the drilling rig. Like
Right.
it's like they're like, hey man, I came here illegally. Fuck you. Like you're taking my job and I'm gonna kick your ass. And like it's just like things get settled behind a
Yeah.
frac tank with a 36-inch pipe wrench, as we like to say. But no, you're correct. Is that most Americans are very sympathetic to this. We want good legal immigrants to come in here because we need a bigger workforce, right? Americans aren't having kids. Our birth rate's like 1.2, right? And the good thing is that they also bring great values over here too, whether it's from a religious aspect. A lot of them are
Yep.
mostly Christians, right? They abide by the same things we do for the most part. So they had that moral, ethical programming already in their society, and they didn't come from like some of the countries I've been to. They're not living in a tent in the middle of nowhere. Right.
Right.
They understand basic hygiene and like, sewage systems and things like that, which is a problem. And many of the other countries I've spent in the Middle East, but they are just as American as my great grandfather and grandmother were when they came over from Italy and Ireland. Right. And they want to be part of building the infrastructure and being a part of this amazing culture that we call America. And I think your organization is leading that charge without any recognition for doing that. Right. Because without you, it's not the State Department that's doing this. You know what I mean? Like, let's be honest. Like, it's
Yeah.
none of these things, right? It's regular Americans like yourself who felt a call to serve in uniform, but you're still serving now. And I always joke around, but no, we never take the uniform off. That oath always persists. And this is what we do, right? Is that we are helping build America and this for the next generation, right? Because let's be honest, Curtis, you and me aren't going to be here one day, right? And
No.
if there's not a generation of Americans or immigrants who became Americans that come up behind us to fulfill what this country's all about, what are we even doing, right? So you're helping set
Yeah.
up that next generation. I just want to commend you for your efforts because it's something that's just not being talked about.
Well, the nice thing about it, Adam, is the model that we built here, which I think is pretty good and works well, is something that could be so easily replicated
Hmm.
in every small town in America. And ultimately, I think that's the best way we do immigration. I love the idea that you've got a sponsor-based program. Now, in the case of the Uniting for Ukraine program, which is the one that Biden formed for bringing over Ukrainians, that is paused now. It's not officially been killed like the other ones, but we're not bringing anybody else over at this
Right.
point, which I'm fine with. I get it. The administration needs to feel comfortable that this is a program worth keeping. What I will tell you, though, from my experiences, this kind of program is the way that we do it. And then if we had 10,000 Carolinas for Ukraine type organizations
Hmm.
in every small town and city around the country, and if we treated all of our immigrants that are coming in that way, I think that's how we just make this country just fly. I mean, we got a great country. We're doing a lot of great things, but just with a little bit of organization, a little bit of focused volunteerism, great stuff. But I do want to get to kind of the main reason I wanted to talk to you
Yeah.
and to your audience, which is as great as this program is and as great the Ukrainians are that we have here in Hartsville. Um, Inadvertently, when we stopped the processing the Uniting for Ukraine applications, the Trump administration also stopped processing their requests for extension.
Mm.
So they came here
Interesting.
with kind of a 2-year humanitarian parole. I think toward the end of Biden's administration, he actually bumped it out a little bit further because obviously Ukraine's still at war, so there's no place for these people to go home, right?
Correct.
But because these extensions are not getting renewed, their work authorizations aren't necessarily getting renewed. And when they're applying to other statuses, because there's other statuses that would allow you to stay longer. I mean, a lot of people, TPS, temporary protected status, right?
Right.
That's a big one, of course. So what happens is eventually their status runs out.
Hmm.
And when that happens, there's this question mark, right?
Yeah.
So right now, as long as they've applied for something else, like they've applied for extension, it seems to be like they're going to be okay.
Yeah.
But what do you do when your work authorization runs out? Because these are law-abiding, good people, and some of them are working for like the Fortune 500 company I have headquartered here, in Hartsville. They don't want to put their employer or themselves in kind of this bad position where they become, quote, undocumented, right? And thrown in the same bucket as some of the people that came across the border illegally.
Right.
So what I'm really asking is, for the administration, because it is the administration's call. And in fact, President Trump himself has said it is going to be his personal call. Sir, just, understand that these people, they fled a war. They don't have a home to go to. They're good people as long as they're not breaking laws. They're paying their taxes. They're working. They're part of our communities. If we can find a way to let them stay, that's what I'm really asking for. Whether that's a blanket extension, it's getting the enough people to really work through all these requests. There's 240,000 of them here, so that's a big number, but it's not as big as a lot of the other alien
Yeah.
groups that have come in, right? So it's not a huge number of folks, but these are people, whether it was Biden or Trump really doesn't matter. The U.S. promised them that they would give them a place, a safe haven for a little while. And I think we should live up to that promise. And I think it's good for America. So
And I don't
That's
think
my
you're
ask.
asking. Yeah, no, I don't think you're even asking for a lot here. They already came here. They already have established jobs. They're already doing the
Yes.
right thing. They're doing the right things. They're not avoiding ICE. They're not getting chased down by ICE agents in like Texas, right? Like it's
Right.
they're not them, right? And well, ironically, Curtis, I'm actually going to be in Washington D.C. next week, meeting with some pretty high level people. So I will actually bring this up in conversation with them directly for you. So that's what I can do for you for
Wow.
sure. You just happen to catch me at the exact right time, and this is completely unplanned, people. This is completely unplanned. No, but for all you out there, and the biggest thing I say is call your congressmen and your senators, and don't stop calling their office. You can look up their numbers on the website. Just annoy the shit out of them, because I will tell you, no one cares about what you say on social media for the most part. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Trump's not going to watch this podcast, but I promise you, if you leave 100 annoying voicemails on their office desk for that 22-year-old receptionist in XYZ's office, they're going to go, God damn it, now we have to do something and respond to this. I
Yeah.
promise you that's exactly how DC works. I don't think you're asking for much here, man. I think this is completely moral and ethical to what we raised our right hand to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't think this is asking for much. I think this is a pretty simple thing for the U.S. government to do. And I know there's so much chaos going on the administration right now, but I think this is something that I think every American on both sides of the aisle can agree that this is the right thing to do as an American citizen, is to help other people become Americans and keep making this country better than it is.
Yeah, and I think it's a win for the administration.
Yeah.
It matches all the priorities, and it takes away this argument that the administration is against anyone who's an immigrant. They're not, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we know we need immigrants. We just want to make sure that it's done legally, and that
Yeah.
these are people that are going to be productive citizens, and they are.
Yeah. No, I agree. Actually, this makes more sense now because I was down at Mar-a-Lago a couple times last year, and it actually makes sense why there's a lot of Ukrainians in West Palm Beach now. They're just waiting for them to drive by and be like, "Hey, can you sign this piece of paper and extend my
Yeah.
stay?" Yeah, there's actually ironically a lot of Ukrainians in West Palm Beach. It's very interesting. I thought that was fascinating when I was down there. So, Curtis, where can people connect with you? Where can they help your organization? Where can they provide donations to? Where can people help you in your mission, besides calling their senators and congressmen outside of this podcast?
Yeah, so we have a Facebook site. Carolinas for Ukraine is the name of the organization. So you can connect with us there. Uh, I got to be honest with you, Adam. I'm not asking for huge donations right now because
Hmm.
we've got a little bit of money and we have enough, I believe, to take care of the Ukrainians that are here. Kind of our contingency plan is if we need to give them a couple of months to support them, like if they lose their job, but they need a little bit of time to figure out where they're going to go to next.
Hmm.
So we want to have a little bit of buffer there. We're not bringing any people more in. So I'm really looking more for exactly what you talked about, political support. Call your senator's office is probably the biggest one. Of course, South Carolina, I've got Senator Graham and Scott here, who are both, pretty good, influential ones. Exactly what you're doing, Adam. Just make people aware. Don't get in anybody's face about it. I mean, this is just like common sense, like the administration talks about. And here's another thing to think about. That war is going to end at some time, and rebuilding Ukraine is going to be a big deal.
God,
And
I'm gonna
there
be
is a
sent over there.
yeah, and
Right, yeah.
there's a huge future for the United States and Ukraine to be partners together in rebuilding a new Ukraine. And who do you think might be some of the glue that could be used during that whole effort? It's going to be a lot of these Ukrainians that are here in the U.S. building relationships, right? Learning how to speak, English the way we speak English, versus the rest of the world, right?
Yeah,
Um, it's all the civil affairs stuff we talked about, right?
it
It's
really is.
relationships, it's information. Most of the ones that come over here, they're very entrepreneurial. They're engineers, they're doctors. They're not. They didn't come on here. They don't come all the way to the U.S. Because of our benefits for sitting on their butt, right?
Yeah, very different mindset.
Very different mindset because those folks, they're in Europe somewhere where
Yeah.
they have better social safety network.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like I said, I'm going to be meeting with some people. I already have some people in mind. I've been thinking about that as we've been talking for the last like minute and 30 seconds. I'm like, ooh, whose office can I stop by since I'm going to be there? But like I said, yeah, it's what I do. I just infiltrate and do. So I do civil affairs in Washington D.C. They just don't know because some of these politicians don't pay attention to what's going on, and they don't realize that this
Yeah.
civil affairs officer. I just wear a suit and I look completely different. I'm not wearing ranks.
Well,
so
I'm actually
they
going to
get
be up
confused.
there Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday next week too. So we'll
What
talk
what
about that offline.
Yeah, sure. We'll do that after we end the podcast. So I'm getting, and I'm now getting like civil affairs mindseted on this stuff because this is like, oh, this is great. This is like another mission for me to do. No, I appreciate you coming on the podcast today. The mission that you're talking about is super important. This is the other side of the legal immigration argument that nobody's talking about.
That's
And
right.
I'm glad I was able to, show you on live today. You got a bunch of people watching you on Twitter, X, and YouTube right now. And then guys, in 2 weeks, I'm going to repost this on everything again. So please click, like, share, get the story out, get in contact with Curtis, follow his Facebook page, and let's start contacting people in the administration. We had. I know we're all upset that the Epstein files didn't get released. Yeah, I get it. Okay, you don't have to run it down my throat. So the way we can counter that is to be good, ethical Americans and go help Ukrainians become Americans who are here to work, pay their taxes, raise their kids, just like the rest of us are trying to do right now.
Absolutely. You nailed it, Adam. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Okay.
No, I appreciate it, sir. Thank you so much for your service and everything you've done for this country. And we'll see you guys. It's going to be like a 2 week spacing on this. I got a lot of crazy stuff going on. I got to fly out of the country again for another couple weeks. But we'll see you guys next time on the next episode of Tuxes Tomahawks. And stay safe out there.
Thanks, everybody.